Jen. I hope that you have all been encouraged by hearing one another's stories about the love of God. We share where we have seen God work because we want to be encouraged. We also know there are days or weeks where you maybe didn't think God was walking with you. And we are right now going through a series in view of God's mercy. You just heard stories of how other people experience or extended the mercy of God. And I want you to think as we move into the message, what is mercy? I'm going to need you to take your middle fingers. We're going to learn to sign mercy together. And it's, all right? I know, that sounded rude. Okay, I'm going to project both middle fingers, one on your heart, one on your gut. Your hands splayed out. You're doing this. And something in your heart and something in your gut got moved. And it makes you reach out to the other person. Mercy is when my heart and my gut are moved and I want to touch the other person. So when we speak about the mercy of God, we are speaking about how you have touched the heart and the gut of God, and He is moving towards you. All right? Mercy. In view of God's mercy comes straight from Romans 12. I hope you have that as your screensaver, have it on your mirror, and by the end of the next it'll be a total of 7 weeks, you'll have it memorized. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. We want a good view of God's mercy, an accurate view, because we can't do all the hard, high calls of being living sacrifices. We cannot become transformed by the renewing of our minds if we have a minuscule or a distorted view of the mercy of God. And so we're looking at what Jesus did so we can have a good view. As you probably know, I got 4 kids, and they're a decade apart from the youngest to the oldest. And that means playing games, going on outdoor activities, are always somebody's not happy. Let's just be honest. All right? This is so babyish. Oh my gosh, this is too hard. So we were hiking because one of the olders needed to go and see a glorious view. Y'all, we weren't 100 meters up the trail, and one of the youngers starts having a full-on asthma attack. Now, the funny thing as a parent is asthma attacks and anxiety attacks look about the same, and in the moment, you can't always tell. But it was clear the younger wasn't going to make it where the older wanted to go. And so, the older went and got a view of BC that is glorious and is magnificent. The next slide. And the youngers, well, we went to the parking lot and we got some water to calm everybody down. And after we went to the parking lot, we found a little 2.5-kilometer flat circle. And we had some nature. You hear the birds, you see the trees, you see this lake. But we didn't get the full view. And we're going to come back to how we experience different views of God's mercy. Today we want to look in Luke chapter 5, starting in verse 12, about how a particular man with a skin disease experienced the mercy of Christ. While Jesus was in one of the towns, a man came along who was covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he fell with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. "I am willing." He said, "Be clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. Then Jesus ordered him, "Don't tell anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them." Yet the news about him spread all the more, so that crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. So I want to just, because there's enough medical people in the room, this is not leprosy as in Hansen's disease. There were about 72 different skin diseases that would make people unclean. So I always assumed it was like, don't spread the disease. But it was about not spreading the ritual impurity. That they could not access being together. If they touched it and somebody else touched it, it would be as though they had been with a dead body. So they could not worship. They could not gather with people. Now think about how you felt in early COVID. There was no vaccination in sight, and you are stuck wherever you are. And maybe you got stuck with a couple of people, but it wasn't all the people you were used to being with. And how did you feel? Did anybody feel low of spirit? This was this man's all the time. This wasn't for a season. This was his life, and his foreseeable future was in utter isolation, unless he found another group of people with skin disease who he got to hang out with. We do know that happened some. In the illness, in the separation, there was also the assumption, you got this because you did something wrong. So it's not just you have a condition that you have to learn to accept and you're isolated, but it is God has given you this as a permanent punishment. There is a long history in Israel of people with leprosy being healed. Earlier in Luke 4:27, Jesus said, "Remember when Naaman the Syrian got healed by Elisha? There were a bunch of other lepers, but he healed that one." Naaman came to Elisha. Elisha did something. So when Jesus is being asked, he is being put in with Moses and with Elisha, who had also healed people who had skin diseases. Now we know, this is long before the Mount of Transfiguration. He was friends with Moses. He was friends with Elisha, but he was also God. So they had to give the people something to do to be healed, to know that it was from God. Jesus healed. People with this skin disease were called the walking dead, because they were so isolated. So when Jesus comes to heal this man, it is not just a kindness. It is a mercy, but it is a life-giving. Let me restore you to the land of the living. In Psalm 27, 13 and 14, it says, "I am confident of this. I will again see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living." But I believe this man had quit believing that. You know why I believe that? It's the little words, "if you're willing." He does not doubt that God is able. He does doubt, is God willing? Have you been there? You have prayed, God didn't answer. And you're like, I know, I'm not trying to be a petulant child, but I'm not asking for something bad. I'm asking for something good. And where is the Lord in this? If you are willing, he says. He has no crisis of God's faith and capability, but faith in God's character. Underlying the "if you are willing" is, are you good? And do you see me? Did any of you, when we sang about God having our names written on his hand, now you know that's straight from Isaiah. That is scripture. But do you ever doubt? Well, God likes everybody else, but he's too busy to see me. Do you ever feel that way? If you do, you're human. And you can understand what this man felt. This is probably not the first time he'd asked for help. He'd been to some doctors. He had asked for prayer. His family initially, they would have asked people to pray for his healing. And yet, there had been no mercy showing up. If you are willing, is a crisis of faith in God's mercy for me. If you have not already, you will come to this point of crisis. And then he tells Jesus what Jesus already knows. You have the ability. You could make me clean. I also want you to notice, what does he ask? Does he say, you could heal me? He asks to be clean. He knew that in his heart, he believed, he took on, this is some sign of God's punishing me. There was shame, there was guilt. It also may be that some of his struggles are that he knew his own spirit was no longer clean. The way he thought about people with good skin, maybe he by now was resentful. The pain of isolation had made him have habits that were emotionally probably unclean. That's what humans do. Shame doesn't make us nice. It usually makes us mean or pitiful. And pitiful in a way to get attention, pitiful. Not feel sorry for you, pitiful. Not merciful, pitiful. And he is asking, no, he doesn't ask for healing. He asks, Jesus, do you have a willingness to help me? And can you make me clean? I love that Jesus reaches out of his hand. There are, and if you want the list, I'll give it to you later, a bajillion, Old Testament Bible verses where God reaches out his hand and things happen. And Jesus, okay, now I need to see your mercies. I'm going to hold the mic, so y'all do it with me. Middle finger on your heart, middle finger on your gut. You're not being rude to yourself, and you move. God's mercy is coming at him. Jesus reaches out. And he uses the man's own words to say, I am willing. I do not know where each of you is wondering if God is willing. But I do believe Jesus would come and sit with you. And he would say, I am willing. And he moves towards you. Sometimes we have trouble sitting with the Lord long enough to experience the moving towards us. Because anxiety creates this urgency, creates this, I've got to move, I've got to do something, and we don't sit with the one who can do it. I'm going to share a story that was just told to me by a good friend, and I have permission. It is personal, and she said, please share it. Now, I also don't want you to hear in this a whole lot of political. I'm telling you about the mercy of God for this family, and you'll understand in a moment. My friend, how it came up this weekend, came over for tea and was showing me photos of her niece's wedding, and she didn't get to go. You know what it's like. You live far away from your family, and you miss things you really didn't want to miss. And then she says, but I want to tell you about my younger niece. I've never told you. And what happened is that her younger niece, when she was in utero, the family had been told, you need to terminate. The minister told the extended family, y'all, they're facing the hardest situation. Don't go add into their guilt. Don't tell them anything else. And they're like, okay, we won't add to their guilt. We'll just be with them. Well, in particular, the ultrasound said that there were 3 birth defects, and this world-class hospital had never had any specialist who could treat all 3, and that this baby was not viable. So the family had actually asked their minister and been just like, we are with you, whatever happens. The mother calls her best friend. And y'all, the best friend hung up on her. That is not the best friend you want in a scary, intense decision making. You're like, oh my gosh, this person utterly bailed. The friend took a second, prayed apparently, and called back. And this friend says, I don't want you to do it. I don't believe in that. And I don't think it's going to be life-giving for you. So the husband and wife talked. And they're like, what do we do? So they show up at the termination appointment the next day. And they told the doctor, we're not going to do it. And the doctor was not happy. You do understand, and you do understand in your life and this baby. And I'm like, yeah, we do. So there's a little bit of bitterness in this, I think. The doctor said, okay, when the baby is born, there is nothing we will do for the first 24 hours. You will be in your room taking care of your baby, but we can do nothing. We've told you that already, and y'all are not taking our best medical advice. And so the baby was born, and they were left alone with 3 major heart birth defects. But y'all, that baby lived. And then 24 hours later, surgery started. And the photos that I was seeing in the wedding were of a 19-year-old who is studying kinesiology, I believe it is, so she can become a physiotherapist. But what I want to point out is when the family said, Jesus, where are you? We're going to follow. We don't know. The best advice we're getting medically is this. That's what we're willing to do. And until somebody spoke into their life, maybe God's mercy might look different. They were going to just go with the doctor's advice. A sister in Christ said, I think there's some different mercy. Someday you're going to have decisions and you don't know what to do. And you need a healthy view of God's mercy. And you may not have the view of God's mercy. And you may need a brother or sister to come and bring God's mercy to you, so that your 19-year-old can walk in the land of the living. In view of God's mercy for this man meant he came to Jesus and said, am I actually written on your hand? Everybody else has all but forgotten me. They might leave me food, but I am utterly isolated. Can you make me clean? Not just my body, but my whole heart. Jesus is willing. Jesus moved towards him. Jesus did not do this for branding. Can you imagine now? We would have this all over Instagram. It would Snapchat spread, and Twitter would have commentary galore. Jesus said, don't go tell. Why is that? Because Jesus was humble. He was also not a heal-in-the-box kind of God. He was wanting the whole person, and he knew that people would try and force his hand. He was not willing, and I borrow the words of another scholar, Mr. Nolan, Dr. Nolan. Nevertheless, Jesus did not place himself at the people's disposal or to be taken possession by them. That's why he's saying, don't go tell. It's not because he didn't have mercy, but it was a boundary. Do you know why I think we sometimes struggle to show mercy to each other? Is if I'm helping you today, you might ask something of me in the next hour or tomorrow, and I don't have it to give. Because I don't want to be at your disposal. I don't want you taking possession of me, so I'm just not going to get involved in your mess. But the mercy of God says that I will be touched and I will move towards. Coming back to my pictures. If we have a truncated view of God, we'll go back to the parking lot one. All right? You know what happens in a parking lot? A parking lot is evidence of what I have either worked for, stolen, or borrowed. And in that, I have a lot of pride and a lot of effort. Now, I know some of y'all may be car people, but parking lots are kind of ugly. And it is hard to have a view of God's mercy when all I see is either what I've worked hard for, or I've stolen, or I've borrowed. Some of us have the 2.5 flatland hike view of God. We hear the birds sing and we know, oh, He's got His eye on me. He's got it on the Spirit on me. We can smell some freshness and see some beauty. We can go back. But you know what? We miss the vastness of God's grace and glory. Because we're a bit shy or scared or not sure we have what it takes to do the hard hike. And we are people who are choosing to journey together with Jesus and with one another so that we can know Him more, so that we can have a full, vast understanding of the mercy of God. So don't go for the parking lot view or even the 2.5K. Now, if the 2.5K is all you can take right now, that's all right. Listen to those who've taken the harder journey and learn their views of the mercy of God, because that's what happens in original moments we start to hear. Start to share your hard personal stories of where the mercy of God has shown up. Start to keep a list. In my undergrad, I wasn't sure about God answering prayer and wondering why I was praying. So you want to know what my Petri dish was? It was a little dollar store notebook. Get one. And I started listening. I'd put the date and anything I prayed about, I just listed. And then once a week, I'd go back and see, had God answered anything? Y'all, first of all, God was answering things I didn't remember I had prayed about. And He was answering things later when I would have thought He hadn't answered. It was a foundational piece of me understanding the mercy and the power and the responsiveness of God. Because if I don't remember I even prayed it, how do I thank Him that He's answered it? So I am just encouraging you to go get a dollar store notebook and keep a list and see what God answered. Put the date when He answers. It was formative. The other way we get the view of God's mercy is we come to Jesus and we ask, we say, I'm not sure you're willing. I don't feel you're showing up for me on this one. We talk to brothers and sisters in Christ and we say, God is not showing up. It can be simple things. It can be things where you feel embarrassed. My brother, my youngest brother, got married in Korea. And we the time didn't have a lot of money. And we didn't have money for me to go. But you don't want to miss your brother's wedding. Okay? And so I'm like, well, and if God even cared? And Craig's like, well, I'm sure He does. But even if He doesn't. And then guess what? I'm like having a fit. Can you tell? I'm having a fit. I'm not going to my brother's wedding. Our car engine broke. I was like, this has gone from bad to worse. That engine cost what the plane ticket cost. And if God wanted me to see my brother's wedding, He could have kept that car together. And look at God. Do y'all ever have fits like this? Is it just me? Okay. So this is my fit. I went to my brother's wedding. And we did not starve. And we did make rent. But it was a crisis of faith. It wasn't just a disappointment. I wasn't sure if God was willing. I didn't know if God was going to see me. And that is what I want you to be honest with yourself. I'm struggling with the willingness of God to meet what I think is an important need. Because that's the beginning on the hard hike to the vastness. All right, the last picture. This is from a book called Crucial Conversations. I encourage you to read it. You'll need it for work. You'll need it for your personal relationships. But what I want us to see for today, something happens. For this man, it was his illness. For us, it can be we fail a course. We have a cruel advisor. A friend hurts us. Something happens. And then we tell ourselves a story. Our story, our explanation to ourselves and to others about what just happened becomes as true as the actual factual events. And then we start to feel things and act. Okay? If we feel this is going poorly, I want you to see in silence, we withdraw, avoid, or mask. I see Christians do this all the time. They avoid deep, hard conversations. They withdraw from meaningful Christian community, or they mask. Y'all, that's the part we hate. Because like, man, these people are hypocrites and they're acting so like fake. But you know what? It comes from pain. And that's where we can move in mercy to each other, is we realize some story got told that is not the whole truth. And here's why we're doing this. We all have some stories about God that are not the truth of God's character. And so if your experience is not lining up with what you see described about who God is in the Bible, just process that. Start asking yourself. I'm not saying you haven't had something hard, and I'm sure somebody's done you wrong, because that's what people do. However, I know that God's character is true and faithful. True story. Early dating, Craig didn't return a call. Craig didn't show up when he said he was going to. I was sure he was a bad guy, and I was sure I was utterly rejected, and life was terrible. I'm so done. I don't want my feelings getting hurt. But you know what that was? That was the story of a guy before Craig. That actually wasn't the story of Craig. And I needed some time to get some new stories. So now, if Craig doesn't text me right back, we've moved from phone calls in our relationship to texting because like technology changes. Guess what? Only thing I might worry about is, oh Lord, please don't let him have a wreck. Because his character has been proven again and again for 35 years. The character of God is trustworthy. The character of God is willing, is reaching out to make you clean and whole and healthy and peaceful. The character of God says, I have mercy for you, and it is vast and it is deep. And if the story you're telling yourself is not that story, then I pray for your healing. And I pray that you'll start asking questions. Why is my story, my reality, and what I've heard about God not matching? And that you'll take the time to sit there. So this week, I hope you will all paint a picture of your view of the mercy of God. Start making a list of how you have seen his mercy, both in the big, strong Bible verses and Bible stories, and in the small things. And start developing a whole picture of the mercy of God, who is a God who says, I am willing, be clean. We're going to move straight into the Lord's Supper. I'm going to talk from here and then move there. When we come to the Lord's table, we are coming to the place of mercy. We are coming to remember where he has given his body and his blood. We are coming to a table that also gives us a view of his mercy in the end of all things, where the kingdom feast is going to happen, and somebody from every tribe and every nation is going to be at that party, you all. When we come to the Lord's table, we have a view of his mercy at the cross. We have a view of his mercy as the Lamb upon the throne, who will wipe away every tear and who will give a feast where we celebrate the mercy of God, where he has been touched in his heart and gut, and he has been moved to us. And so as we start to serve in just a moment, I want you to ask the Lord, what is my view of your mercy? And help me see it.